EUCOM. U.S. European Command. A command historically rooted in the Cold War, defending Central Europe against possible attack from the East. But the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 and the collapse of communism, the Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact changed the course of history and the future of U.S. EUCOM forever. EUCOM, the new look.
We are today in a much more complex world, and EUCOM has a much broader mission than it ever did before, because before it had the luxury of concentrating on one thing only, and that was to defend Europe from the communist threat.
That's one of the pluses of forward deployed forces, is we can get places in 6 hours that it takes people 24 to come from the States.
But we've got units that can get a call at midnight and 10, 12 hours later, it's supposed to be gone.
No one service can do this alone. So we're a team, and the new look in EUCOM, the new look in NavEur is being a team player, being part of the team, having the tools to do that, the training and the personal inclination to pursue it.
EUCOM, the new look, with AFN News Director Ann Mulligan.
Everything was so simple back then in the 1970s and 1980s. This is the Fulda Gap with its fence dividing what was East and West Germany. This is where analysts suppose that the Soviet military would charge the border and attack Germany. This is where the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment would sound the alarm and begin the defense of Europe. EUCOM's role was very easy to understand and support back then. They were the bad guys. We in NATO were the good guys. They had a huge military, we had a huge military. They had nuclear weapons, we had nuclear weapons. But the clear and massive threat is gone now, just like most of this fence. Former enemies are now friends, and the large U.S. military buildup in Europe will be cut by half. What are we still doing here in Europe? You've heard the talk. Bring the forces home. Let the Europeans defend themselves. If we need to bring troops to Europe, we can do it from bases in the States. Well, we'll let the leaders of the U.S. European Command tell you where they see the threat today, where the risks are, why they feel we need forward deployed troops, and how they're refiguring to cope with drawdown in their new missions. And we'll explain why the words smaller but smarter are EUCOM's new look.
First, what is EUCOM? Our government divides the world into military areas of responsibility. U.S. European Command's area extends from pole to pole, the top of Scandinavia to the tip of Africa, 79 countries. EUCOM is also forces, Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines, but fewer forces as drawdown continues. EUCOM had 323,000 troops at the height of the Cold War. Drawdown has reduced the number to roughly 200,000. The end state figure is 150,000 forces by 1995.
The same high standard is being maintained today with the current deployment.
EUCOM Commander General John Shalikashvili feels the precise number of U.S. forces is less important than the operational capabilities they represent. And he feels the opportunity to downsize the forces and save taxpayers' money is only one of the pluses that have come from change.
And the fact that you and I and our children can go to bed tonight and not give a second thought to the outbreak of a global conflict is probably the most extraordinary good thing that has happened. Just think of what President Yeltsin and President Bush were able to announce the first part of June during the summit in Washington as far as nuclear arms reductions were concerned. That far transgressed whatever we were able to achieve during the START negotiations. The CFE agreement that we finally were able to hammer out that greatly reduced the conventional armaments in Europe. That too is just a great step forward. And then finally, we are in the final throes of achieving a chemical weapons ban, and that is something that we've been trying to get for decades. So while each agreement might not be totally perfect and others might quarrel with it, when you take that in total, what we've been able to achieve to reduce the level of armaments is phenomenal.
And of course, there is a negative side to this. Change sometimes produces turmoil.
As communism evaporated, we all of a sudden found that it left behind a residue of these unresolved conflicts, so very often rooted in the ugliest side of nationalism, border disputes, ethnic disputes, and newspaper headlines and television stories every day from places like Nagorno-Karabakh or Sarajevo remind us just how far we are still from having a Europe that is whole and free and safe for our children.
The EUCOM commander depends on people like Ed Quam and his staff to tell him where the risks are from day to day. Quam is EUCOM's executive intelligence analyst. He works in a windowless office, but he sees what's happening in the 79 countries of EUCOM and some nearby areas that could cause trouble. Both he and General Shalikashvili talked about the new risks: ethnic turmoil, political upheaval, and even environmental disaster, such as the possible risk of another Chernobyl.
Indeed, we have 15 Chernobyl-type reactors. They're technically known as RBMKs in 5 nuclear generation plants in the former Soviet Union. They're fragile, as Chernobyl indicated to us, and the concern is that they can't turn them off because it's necessary for their livelihood and power generation. There's also the issue of, as the weapons are destroyed and dismantled, of safing the fissile material, of getting rid of the solid propellant, and the environmental impact that will cause, if it's done wrong, certainly will impact the European environment almost immediately. And that's
what the former Soviet Union isn't doing right now also worries Quam. The Soviets used to be a powerful influence in African and Middle Eastern affairs. Their absence creates another problem.
The changes in the Middle East and Africa were slower before the wall came down, before the changes in the East took place. But now, with the cap taken off in many areas, without some of the subduing effects of East-West competition in Africa, the times are ripe for change rapidly, and we've seen that.
In fact, one of the biggest challenges facing EUCOM is restructuring for today's risks. No longer the Soviet Warsaw Pact armies in Eastern Europe, but a whole series of risks and instabilities to the east, as well as around the Mediterranean and Africa. Analysts point out that the majority of recent conflicts involving EUCOM forces took place in and around the Med: Libya, Lebanon, Desert Storm, and the Iraqi-Kurdish conflict on the Turkish border. The Air Force in Europe can talk to you about the new EUCOM hotspots. General Robert Oak's forces are about half of what they were during the Cold War, but the mission remains large.
The likelihood of someone that's not in part of a government taking a shot at us, that's what makes it more dangerous.
USAFE has found itself uniquely qualified to take up EUCOM's rapidly expanding humanitarian mission. Crews fly daily into war-torn Sarajevo for Operation Provide Promise.
It reflects back on our Berlin airlift heritage, in fact. And so we're enthused about our ability to go and do that, and do it safely, and do it for the survival of those folks affected there in Sarajevo and the region.
They feel good. They know that when they go to download humanitarian supplies, people are getting something from what they're doing. They see an end result, and that's good to them.
USAFE has been a key player in the whole Provide series of missions, each one different. Provide comfort in Turkey, flying in supplies and providing support and protection for the Kurds against Saddam Hussein's forces in northern Iraq. Provide hope, delivering food to the former Soviet Union. And provide transition, enabling the Angolan government to move demobilized soldiers back to their hometowns.
It's real hairy out there. We came down on our third airfield. and we had a UN observer came up to me and said, come with me, and he showed me a mob of 300 people. Loadmaster said we had room for 60, started marching 60 out to the plane. The other 250 or so realized they weren't going to get on. They rushed the plane. It was a mob scene. Loadmaster shut up the door. We jumped in and just flew out of there. It can get dangerous.
I suspect there's never been a case in U.S. Air Force history where we have flown foreign nationals back to their voting places so that they could participate in probably their first ever free election. We're excited about that, and we think that that will be a very significant mission element, and it shows the flexibility of the new USAFE.
Lieutenant General David Maddox, Commanding General 5th U.S. Corps, will join Major General Rutherford for the casing of the colors.
Although the Army is taking the biggest cut in drawdown, only the drawdown units are thinking about packing up and going away. The rest of USAR is maintaining a high level of readiness. Their commander, General David Maddox, has learned that the Persian Gulf mission didn't go away with the end of the war.
I didn't think the first night I was in my house that someone would call me and say, we'd like to have some Patriots in Kuwait. And I said, when would you like them? They said, now. And that was at midnight, and at between 2:30 and 3 o'clock the next afternoon, a Sunday afternoon, we had a Patriot battery ready to go.
Roger. We just got a scud alert. Azimuth 170 degrees. Call to CP. Tell them we got a scud alert. 5 scuds inbound for Kuwait.
Clear downrange.
Make sure it's downrange. Bring up the launchers. Tell me when you're ready. Verify hard copy unit. Verifying tab 1.
CP, we have a scud. Tab 7 verified, sir.
Roger. Assets are good. Air's good. Data collector on. Cord mode 2 is on.
Okay, sound the alarm. Tell site we have a scud alert. Call the rear. You're the 4th man. Go in the van.
Exercise, exercise, exercise. Scud alert, scud alert. I say again, this is a battle shorted.
Okay, get on track 13. Okay, 11's on and engage. Got all launchers up. ICC, this is Kuwait. We got 32 hot missiles. Right now, we've got 5 scuds inbound, TBMAs. Okay, check it 12.
Of uncertainty.
You on track 15?
There's some excitement, but mostly uncertainty.
All right, right now 12 is going to be moving out.
A scud is inbound, whether it's an alert, somebody's jumped the gun. You never really can tell.
13's covered. 16 looks like it's going in the drink. First 2 already been killed.
The world is not stable, and the requirement to have soldiers and units that are trained, disciplined, ready to go, I think is more important now than it really was 3-4 years ago. And so we really do have a mission.
With attention now focused on the Mediterranean, General Shalikashvili says the Navy's mission has become more indispensable than ever before. The aircraft carrier battle group and amphibious forces provide a mobility that gives EUCOM a special edge.
We don't need a host nation to say, yes, you can fly off of our airfields and you can fly with ordnance and you can do X or you can do Y, and we agree because our national priorities match your national priorities. We don't need that. We can go to an area, we can stay there for a long, long time, and we do. We have an airport, we have a field. It's a self-defended field. We're not flying strikes anywhere. We're not flying over the country, but you better believe everybody knows that there's an aircraft carrier sitting there that responds to the people of the United States, that has a lot of capability, and that we're interested.
ETCC, Lieutenant Colonel Tomlinson.
Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Barry Tomlinson and an NCO are on duty at the European Theater Command Center. If an aircraft carrier battle group is positioned off former Yugoslavia, or USAFE planes are conducting an airlift in Africa, or Patriot missile batteries are deploying to Kuwait, it's all being tracked in this top-secret underground room at EUCOM headquarters in Stuttgart.
seen the CNN saying, this is the newsroom, this is the heart, this is where all the action is. Well, this is the ETCC, this is the heart, this is where all the action is when we have ongoing operations.
This hub is the single point of contact for senior commanders who want information day or night on what's going on in EUCOM. Not an action officer himself, the command director will tap specialists for the answers. During the Gulf War, a crisis action team moved in to man the computers continuously. But the ETCC wasn't always a permanent operation. It would come together for a crisis and then disband. The fact that it's now a full-time, round-the-clock operation says something about EUCOM's mission today.
Just give you a brief orientation on where you are, what you're doing, what the other platoons have done already, so you don't make the same mistakes and you can do the same good things that they've done.
Here's the scenario. A Mediterranean nation in turmoil, a dangerous situation for U.S. civilians there. The State Department recommends evacuation. Who's called in? The Navy, the Marines, the Army, the Air Force? Answer, all of them. As EUCOM forces get smaller, no one service can always do a mission alone. More and more we'll see a joint approach, including a joint task force. EUCOM Exercise Division trains commanders to think joint.
Normally there's a commander that's designated from one of the services, and he's normally designated because the operation or the exercise has a certain long-term flavor. It may be Army, let's say. His deputy then would probably be Air Force or Marines or Navy or something like that. But his staff is not an Army staff. His staff is a true bona fide joint staff. So we think, number one, it gives you this kind of combat multiplier, if you will, from knowledge that's presented by experts in their field. It also gives you, I think, a flexibility of thought or a different attitude, a different perspective on an issue. So I think that's...
But how do you get these different attitudes and perspectives to work together in a crisis? You train for it.
Saying that if the whistle blows on short notice, you are the kind of guys that are going to come here.
These senior officers are part of Joint Warrior, a symposium designed to tap all the accumulated experience of Desert Storm and other joint exercises before the normal rotation process takes the experience out of the theater.
Except that some of the problems we found we didn't realize we were going to have.
EUCOM also conducts crisis response training, allowing a commander to run through an artificial problem under extreme time pressure with just normal communications planning and intelligence data.
We gave the commander a series of crises in the Med, around the Med, and each of them was interrelated. And we forced him to respond and react to each of those crises, or to each crisis. Sometimes that response was nothing more than passive defensive measures. Sometimes it required him to take direct military action to resolve it.
So imagine yourself for a moment getting a call one day saying the United States has decided to participate in a coalition that is going to enforce a no-fly zone over Bosnia. You are going to go down to EUCOM, form up a JTF staff.
And often now, EUCOM purposely designs the training to mirror a real-life situation.
We learned an awful lot during Provide Comfort about the value of certain kinds of intelligence information with which we had not been typically used to dealing, such as cultural intelligence. Very few of us knew very much about the background, the historical relevance of the conflict between the Kurdish population and those of its neighbors. And yet these kinds of considerations figured very heavily in that operation. Now, as we plan future JTF operations, we know that background of the area of operations is extremely important to us.
We really believe that these joint operations are the way to go, not just for the sake of being joint, but because they bring all kinds of new capabilities to the party, and when we can put them together intelligently, we have even more powerful and more professional military operations than we've had in the past, and that's saying something.
EUCOM Commander General Shalikashvili's introduction to EUCOM's new look found him as commander of Operation Provide Comfort in Turkey in 1991.
EUCOM, without giving it a second thought, had me as the commander. My deputy was an Air Force officer, my chief of staff was a Marine, and the whole force throughout was a joint team. What really brought home the fact that we were a joint team was one day when I was flying back in a C-12 from having picked up a wounded Special Forces officer. And I looked around at the airplane that we were in, and the pilot was a Air Force officer, and the doctor administering that Army Special Forces guy was a Navy doctor. And you could not have had a better joint team working together. And that is true for everything that EUCOM does. EUCOM does not think of doing things other than as a joint team.
We've seen how EUCOM has adapted to a real-world mission that's vastly different than waiting for an attack on Germany. The focus has shifted south, and EUCOM has added humanitarian missions. From a calculated air-land battle defense, the emphasis now is on rapid reaction, trained and ready to move small units on just a phone call. And no one service could always do it alone anymore. Due to drawdown, the right mix may be a joint mix. EUCOM is training commanders to think and act joint. And the new look may be multinational. The Army is leading the way, having just joined NATO's Rapid Reaction Corps.
It makes it interesting because we have talked for years about operating with our allies. But for many of us, operating with our ally was to have one on the next flank. You know, there was a German corps over here, or a Belgian corps, or whatever. And yet, now we're talking about having divisions in our own corps. And so, how do we work together? How do we make sure that the same word means the same thing to both of us? Do we have procedures that are compatible? Those things are going to become much more relevant than they were before. We worked them before, we talked about them before, but now it's going to be real business.
Now, so I can take a look
and USER feels it's leading the way in the real business of training senior commanders through simulation. Good examples are 5th Corps exercise Central Fortress and the 92 Reforger exercise Certain Caravan.
Yeah, G2, need an update about current situation, and then a brief update by the G3 following.
I don't get paid to be able to beat up on somebody my own size. I get paid to beat up somebody bigger than me, and we could never put that resource out. Now we have, for the exercise we're going on, there'll be 2 friendly corps fighting 2 enemy armies. So who's providing all these people that we used to have to go put a unit out? Well, the OPFOR is being run from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And so they're there. We have a division that is coming over to reinforce my Army group, and they're never going to leave the United States. They're hooked via communications, via satellite and simulation, and we'll give them orders by voice, real. They'll make decisions, and the action will occur right in the simulation.
Which is, if one of them went down, if one of these went down, an option would be...
Computers are one way the military can be smarter about its assets because its new look is smaller. While the Army, and to a lesser degree the Navy, have downsized, the Air Force has downsized and completely changed its structure.
We have gone to what we call the objective wing, where we have tried to emphasize command and the role of command, and if people worked for an individual, we tried to put them under his or her command directly so that there was a greater sense of responsibility for the person.
USAFE is also making permanent an experience that worked well in the Gulf War. The base at Incirlik, Turkey, and soon Bitburg-Spangdahlem will be composite wings. Instead of one type of aircraft, USAFE will station a package of aircraft with different capabilities that work well together on a mission.
Disconnect now. 6 is disconnect. 10, 20, 40.
USAFE is also updating its aircraft. The new F-15E replaces the F-111 at RAF Lakenheath, United Kingdom. Not just an air-to-ground bomber, the F-15E is also an air-to-air fighter.
Employed by ourselves and be able to both defend ourselves, fight our way into the target, and be able to fight our way back out without any support.
The F-15E is best at night in bad weather, when its improved radar can precisely pinpoint targets. The F-15E represents not just a change in technology, but a change in mission, the same change facing all of EUCOM.
Now, our primary mission is mobility, and it's to take these 24, 26 aircraft that we're going to have in this squadron and deploy in very short notice to any place in the world.
The key to everything EUCOM plans for the future is a philosophy called forward presence, a forward deployed force, 1 corps and 2 divisions for the Army, 3.5 fighter wings for the Air Force, and a carrier battle group and amphibious forces in the mid. A force that's here, now, ready to go, competent, and capable. Lieutenant Commander Bob Rawls is a long-range planner in EUCOM's Plans and Policy Directorate, which looks at the national military strategy and what forces EUCOM needs to conduct that strategy. He supplies the argument against those who feel we don't need U.S. troops any longer in Europe. Yes, we'd save some money, estimated at 10 to 20%, but he says stationing forces here sends a signal that can't be measured in dollars. It gives us a leadership role in Europe.
That is the only certifiable commitment, something that you can reach out and touch. If you take the forces home, then it becomes a political commitment, and that political commitment means different things to different people, including your potential adversaries.
Forward presence has also allowed EUCOM to extend a hand to former adversaries. Romanian pilots, only recently considered the enemy, played host to a USAFE team in Bucharest, showing off the most intimate details of their aircraft.
All the instruments are different. They have a different concept of
We show you all we have here, our aircraft, our labs, our way of training, and we consider that we were very open to you.
Discussions ranged from flight safety and pilot training to logistics and sports. The military-to-military program goes both ways. The Romanians and other former Soviet and Warsaw Pact military teams will visit their U.S. counterparts. The goal is to increase contacts and improve relations. Economically, too, U.S. forward presence has provided a stable atmosphere in Europe for trade. Trade that has benefited the United States, and Rawls estimates has created 2.4 million U.S. jobs. But militarily, can we station forces in the U.S. and still fulfill our commitment to NATO? Being an ocean closer gives USAFE and EUCOM's other components a measurable advantage.
We can get places in 6 hours that it takes people 24 to come from the States.
Being here also means you've spent the time and effort to develop alliances, coalitions, and support agreements on the ground in the host nations.
And the effectiveness of air in the Gulf War, I think, can be directly attributable to a significant degree on the basis of our experience in NATO. It let us weld together a coalition, an effective air coalition, quickly and very, very effectively.
General Shalikashvili maintains that NATO is the strongest glue that ties the United States and Europe together. Forward presence also ensures rapid reaction, the cornerstone of EUCOM's new look. Why is rapid reaction so important? Back to the threat again. Iraq is a good example of a country that became a threat literally overnight.
Before the Persian Gulf crisis, yes, we knew that Iraq had a significant military capability. We could reach out, we could measure it, it was there. However, they didn't have an adverse or a hostile intent. But almost overnight, in the beginning of the Persian Gulf crisis, the intent changed.
Iraq went from friend to foe in one day. The rest is history. Could the U.S. have put together a coalition strong enough and fast enough if it were not forward deployed?
That really flies in the face of recent history and really the history of the last century. We have twice this century proven our deep and abiding interest in events in Europe by coming to Europe to fight wars. And I think that forward presence will help us prevent the occurrence of some such war in the future.
For EUCOM and the new look, the future is now. Events continue to unfold that shape and mold the way we do business. EUCOM forces are supporting United Nations and NATO support sanctions against the former Yugoslavia. The U.S. Navy is actively involved through the Standing Naval Force Mediterranean. The 212th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital is open for business in Zagreb, Croatia. Their mission is to provide medical care for the United Nations Protection Force in the area. Other European command officers have been assigned to assist United Nations staffs in Zagreb and Belgrade. Together with other nations, the United States continues its efforts to provide humanitarian support to those in desperate need.
We are today in a much more complex world, and EUCOM has a much broader mission than it ever did before, because before it had the luxury of concentrating on one and one thing only, and that was to defend Europe from the communist threat. The world is much more complicated now, and much more is demanded of the EUCOM family. So we have to change our mindset to understand that and to adjust to our new roles. So, in summary, it is to get smaller, smarter, to understand that the world is much more complex, and in the process never ever to forget to take care of soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines, families and civilian workforce.